So we're going to jump in this morning with a question. I want you to think about whether you are more of a dreamer or a planner. I think most of us are naturally geared a little bit more toward one versus the other. The dreamers in the room, that's those of you who are always thinking about big ideas and you have visions of someday. And the planners are more of our detail people, usually. You're more focused on what's going on in the day-to-day and how to make it happen. So let's do a show of hands. Who are our dreamers? Let's see our dreamers. Wow, okay. So what about the planners? Where are our planners? How many of you are sitting next to someone in your family, a spouse maybe, who answered opposite of you? Yeah, quite a few of us, right? That would be my husband and I as well. We fall into that camp. And if you've spent even 5 minutes with us, you probably already know who is who. Craig is the dreamer of the family. See, you know. Craig's the dreamer. He's back there in the corner laughing loud because he knew where this was going. His brain is always swirling with big dreams, always. And I find that I kind of instinctively brace myself when he starts a conversation with like, I was thinking, or what if we, I'm like, And because I'm the planner, I frustrate him too, because he's over here dreaming and I just jump in with a million questions about like how and why and when and where and crucially, how much. And as frustrating as the push and pull of those kinds of conversations can be for both of us, I actually think that the fact that we have both a dreamer and a planner is more of a feature than a bug in our marriage, because I think all of us should be leaning into both a little bit more. In fact, around here, we at Meadow Heights believe that dreaming and planning with God are two incredibly powerful and incredibly underutilized spiritual practices. We don't always think of them that way, but dreaming and planning can be spiritual practices. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the good news that I get to proclaim is that many people will spend their lives either pining for the past, settling for the status quo, or fantasizing about the future. But we know that God is making all things new. And because of that, when we embrace his invitation to dream and plan alongside him, we bring the hope of his future kingdom into the reality of our lives today. And we're in this series that we've called Design Your Life, which is reminding all of us that God designed each of us with a one-of-a-kind, unique contribution to make within his kingdom. And when we embrace the way that God made us and the experiences and the core convictions that we've picked up along the way in our story, we're able to join him in the good work that he's doing in the world in ways that infuse our life with so much intentionality and purpose and joy. And as we've been doing this each week, we've been looking at the ways these principles play out in the life of one biblical character, the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah. So today we're going to arrive at the most famous words in the entire book of Jeremiah. In fact, I'd be willing to bet that a sizable number of us either have this verse memorized or printed on a piece of decor in our homes right now. It's Jeremiah 29:11, and the most famous translation of this says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And we see this verse all the time. But we usually see it just on its own, outside of the verses around it. And so I think we're at risk sometimes of not seeing the full depth of what this verse really means. I have oftentimes seen this verse pulled from its context and used to claim that saying yes to Jesus is like the fast track, easy path to health and wealth. I've also seen it used to suggest that, God has a plan and my only job is to be a mindless cog, just churning along until it spits out, the dream or the plan for the future. And neither of those could be further from the truth. So today I want us to take a fresh look at this verse in the context of Jeremiah's story, because I think if we do that, these familiar words will take on a much richer meaning. The setting of today's passage is really critical. We have to kind of understand Jeremiah's story up to this point to understand what's going on here. For years, Jeremiah's a prophet. That means God gives him kind of special insight into what's about to happen. So for years, he's been prophesying about the destruction of God's people, Israel. He's been warning that the southern kingdom of Judah in particular, the only part of Israel still remaining in the homeland, they have walked away from God. And if they continue on this course, the consequences are going to be dire. So you can imagine what a popular guy Jeremiah was, right? Like, he's just like, doom and gloom, year after year. And no one listens. In fact, they don't just ignore him or call him crazy. They do everything they can to shut him up. But still, he persists. And by the time we get to chapter 29 in the book, the inevitable has happened, and the destruction that Jeremiah warned them about has begun. To punish Judah for rebelling against the Babylonian Empire, King Nebuchadnezzar and his army come and they ransack Judah's cities and they depose their king. They replace him with a puppet king who will follow Nebuchadnezzar's orders and just go along. And then to keep Judah from attempting to rebel again, he actually deports pretty much all of Judah's key leaders, the soldiers, craftsmen, about 10,000 leaders in total, back to Babylon with him. But Jeremiah is one of those who is left back at home in Judah with the majority of the rest of the population. They're mostly poor peasants. And then God prompts Jeremiah to write this letter to the exiles that are in Babylon. And in this letter, he speaks right into one of the lowest points in Israel's history, where it seems like all hope is lost. And he calls these Jewish captives and leaders to start dreaming and planning with God again. So let's take a look. It says, "The Lord of heavenly forces, the God of Israel, proclaims to all the exiles I have carried off from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and settle down, cultivate gardens and eat what they produce, get married, have children, help your sons find wives and your daughters find husbands in order that they too may have children. Increase in number there so that you don't dwindle away. Promote the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it because your future depends on its welfare. The Lord proclaims, when Babylon's 70 years are up, I will come and fulfill my gracious promise to bring you back to this place. I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope. When you call me and come and pray to me, I will listen to you. When you search for me, yes, search for me with all your heart, you will find me. I will be present for you, declares the Lord, and I will end your captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have scattered you, and I will bring you home after your long exile, declares the Lord." In this letter, Jeremiah is reminding these exiles of the good news that we're talking about today, that they don't have to just pine for the past or succumb and settle for the status quo or fantasize about some amorphous future. They must remember that even now, even in their circumstances, God is making all things new. And they can choose to embrace his invitation to dream and plan alongside God and bring the hope of his future kingdom into the reality of their lives day to day in exile. So why were these two spiritual practices of dreaming and planning so important to the exiles at this moment in their history? And why are they so important for us, even at the times when life feels really hard and things are not going the way that we expected? We're going to tackle them one at a time, and then we're going to kind of take a look at the way they work together. First, dreaming is so important because dreaming gives us hope that tomorrow can be better than today. This was the true meaning of verse 11, when God declares to the exiles, I know the plans I have in mind for you, declares the Lord. They are plans for peace, not disaster, to give you a future filled with hope. The exiles needed to know that the despair that they were experiencing in this moment was not going to be forever. God wanted them to know that he was with them, that he was already working toward a future that was going to be full of peace and full of hope. And so we're going to picture it a little bit like this. I am a terrible artist, so we'll see how this goes, but it's pretty simple. They already had a picture of where they were, right? So we're going to see if this is recognizable, but it's a little "you are here" pin, right? You are here. They knew where they were. They're in Babylon, right? They're in exile. They have a clear picture of that. God invited them into his dream for them to give them a picture of where they're headed. Like, what does the dream look like? What does the future look like for us that we can hold on to? So we're going to put the dream over here. Gosh, this moves around a lot, and for somebody who writes as hard as I do, this is quite the thing. But this is the dream. It looks way more exciting than my handwriting does. So when we dream with God, we have it's like a compass that orients our hearts and lives in a direction. It tells us where to focus our eyes, where to look, right? So the dreaming, it's like this. We're looking all over here. We may be pining for the past or just looking at where we're at or looking around at some fantasy future. But dreaming with God points us in the direction of his dream and for our future and our life. When we dream with God, we stop wandering aimlessly. We get a focus. We can hold on to that truth that God is making all things new. And dreaming with him, he starts to give us a vision of what it looks like when he makes all things new for us to hold on to. When we intentionally dream with God, it orients our direction. And we begin to build confidence in a vision of a tomorrow that looks better than today. So dreaming is the first step because it orients us in a direction. But if we don't actually do anything, that dream can become frustrating, right? We stay right where we are. We're stuck. That's where planning comes in. Because planning is like a bridge that connects our dreams for tomorrow to our reality today. So this is our bridge. Whoa. This is the planning. Planning gets us started. It gets us taking concrete steps in the direction of the dream. I love how God gave really practical instructions to the leaders living in exile in Babylon. He says, build houses, settle down, cultivate gardens, eat what they produce, get married, have children, help your sons find wives and daughters find husbands in order that they too may have children. This is generations we're talking about to make plans for. Increase in number there so that you don't dwindle away. Promote the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. That's a tough one, right? Pray to the Lord for it because your future depends on its welfare. God says to make plans for living with intention today, even while they're holding on to that dream for what the future looks like. Plan to put down roots. Improve the city where you're living in exile. Pray and work for the good of your neighbors, even though they're your enemies. In this way, they're participating in the work that God is doing right now, in and around them, in the present, that will lead them to the dream, that promised future. If we believe that God is always with us, he's always present, always at work, then we don't just hunker down and wait for God to just beam us up out of where we are and deposit us over here. We actually look around and say, where is he at work right now? How can I join him? How has he blessed me and gifted me so that I can be part of what he's doing to make the dream come true? Planning with God means asking him to show us our circumstances through his eyes so that he can help us live by design today, this week, this month, not someday in the future. And as we do, we begin to see ways that we can use the gifts and experiences and convictions that he's equipped us with to embody his love and to bless those around us and help them get hope for the future as well. But the real magic happens not when we dream or plan. We said some of us are geared to one or the other, but we need both. Because when we combine these two practices, practicing both dreaming and planning reminds us that God's kingdom is coming and we can participate in it today. Because when we practice dreaming and planning together, we realize that this bridge, it actually goes both ways. Our plans help give us concrete steps to move us in the direction of the dream. And our dream keep us infused with meaning and purpose and vision in our day-to-day. It changes the way that we live our life right now. When we practice dreaming and planning together, it goes with one of our axioms we talk about all the time that says God meets us in reality. I love what Dallas Willard says about it. He says, God has yet to bless someone except where they actually are. I've come back to that time and time again because it's so easy to live our lives pining for the past or fantasizing about the future, but those aren't real. We are here where we are today in the present, and when we let God meet us where we really are, we can walk with him and learn from him and work alongside him in the present toward the dreams for the future. Did you notice how God doesn't just make a promise to the exiles about someday? He also makes them a promise about their time in captivity. He says, when you call me and you come and pray to me, I will listen to you. When you search for me, yes, search for me with all your heart, you will find me. I will be present for you, declares the Lord, and I will end your captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have scattered you, and I will bring you home after your long exile, declares the Lord. He says, I'm going to be present. I'm going to be with you. And yes, I'm going to end this captivity. But even while you're in captivity, I'm there. I'm going to listen to you. I won't hide myself from you. When you seek, you're going to find me. This promise is for tomorrow, but it's also for today. It's an invitation for them to dream, but also plan. Do you know where else we see this kind of promise and invitation together? It's right after Jesus kind of emerges from his 40 days in the wilderness and he's getting ready to begin his public ministry. The first chapter of the Gospel of Mark says, after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee announcing God's good news, saying, now is the time. Here comes God's kingdom. Change your hearts and lives and trust this good news. Jesus announces that God's kingdom is coming. It's on its way in its fullness, and also that they can follow him and get in on the kingdom right now. That is so beautiful. It's good news for tomorrow, but also for right now. It's a promise that tomorrow can be better than today. That's the dream. That's the picture that orients them. But changing our hearts and lives and trusting the good news, that's the plan for today that leads us to the dream. Jesus knew that many people that he was encountering were spending their lives pining for the past, settling for status quo, fantasizing about the future. But he came to announce that God is making all things new, and it starts now. And he's inviting them to dream and plan alongside God and be part of making the future kingdom a reality right now. In the fall of 2019, I got a chance to go through the full Unique process in kind of an accelerated format. It was intense but wonderful, and I left that experience with some clarity I'd never had before around my unique contribution and the core convictions or values that Brian talked about this idea last week. If you didn't get a chance to hear that message, please catch up on it. But just, fall of 2019, think about that, right? So just a few months later, COVID hit, and the vision that I had in my head of what it was gonna look like for me to live by design with this new clarity got totally upended. And looking back, I realized that I just sort of hit pause, fantasized about a future when life was back to normal, exactly the way it was. My plane could get back on track. The problem was that when COVID was mostly in the rearview mirror, I looked around and the terrain of my personal circumstances had changed quite a bit. I'm probably not the only one that experienced that. But you know what the good news is? My unique contribution doesn't end when my circumstances change. Those things God created in me, the ways that he's redeeming my story, good and bad, the core convictions that those have built in me don't end because unexpected things happen. But it took me practicing dreaming and planning along with God to get my bearings again. I had to sit down and ask God to show me, what does it look like to live out my calling in this life? What does it look like to mobilize understanding? That's my 2-word calling. Here and now. How do I live out my values of simplicity and intentionality, perseverance and freedom in this reality? What do I say yes to? What do I say no to? And it became an incredible filter for me to make decisions about my life in ways I hadn't expected when I went through that experience. A couple weeks ago, I got a chance to get away for a couple of days of silence and solitude with God, something I try to do every year or two if I can. And part of that time was spent dreaming and planning with God. And I came back and I just made these huge strides toward my dreams and plans. No, I'm just kidding. I came back and my kid got flu that night. And then he shared and we barely left the house for 2 weeks. But as I was looking over this message and preparing for it, I realized, you know what, that actually probably gave me an even better opportunity to surrender to God's love and trust this good news. Because God is still at work in, around, and through me, even when our house is crawling with influenza. Did I cross a bunch of stuff off the to-do list? No, I did not. Absolutely not. But it was kind of wild that I noticed how I had this fresh reconnection to my unique contribution and my core values, and how that helped me let go of the less important stuff and focus on what energy I did have on being a more present, intentional, loving mom to my kids who had also had their plans completely derailed. And that had to be God at work, because guys, that is not my default setting. I don't want to spend my life pining for the past, settling for status quo, or fantasizing about a future that doesn't exist. I know that God is making all things new. And I want to embrace that invitation to dream and plan alongside God so that I can be part of making the hope of his future kingdom a reality in my life today. to embody that for the people that I come into contact with. If you haven't had a chance to clarify your unique contribution, your core convictions, core values, guys, what on earth are you waiting for? Seriously. We have an amazing opportunity coming up to do just that. For the first time ever, we're going to offer our full unique experience in a different format, a little closer to how I went through it. Instead of weekly Zoom meetings over several months, this is going to be happening in person over the course of 2 weekends. One in February, one in March. You have to be at both to get the experience. We're talking 4 days total here. This is 1% of your year that can change the way you live the rest of your life with your dream in focus, but with a plan for living today in that reality, using the convictions, the skills, the experiences God's given you. I got to tell you, very few experiences in my life have given me that kind of clarity and really helped make it practical for me to live out my unique calling and be part of the work of God's kingdom like that. Last week, Brian talked about how there are many things we can do, but what's the one thing we must do? And he talked about that even with our church. Like, there are a lot of things our church can do, but the one thing we know we must do is equip people to become an unstoppable source of God's love that changes our world. And Unique is a tremendous equipping opportunity where every single person can leave with a clearer vision for God's dream for their life and a plan to start living it out right now. I just want us to imagine, like, what a beautiful picture of God's love we could paint for the parkland if more and more Heitzers began to get that kind of clarity and they were equipped to live by design like that. I would love to imagine and dream for a future where we're not pining for the past, we're not settling for the status quo, we're not fantasizing about an amorphous future. We know that God is making all things new, guys. And he's inviting us right now to dream and plan alongside him. We get to bring the hope of his future kingdom into the reality of our day-to-day lives today. I want to invite you guys to stand with me. And we're going to bring back up that verse from Mark 1 where Jesus announces the good news of the kingdom. And I'm going to invite you to read that out loud with me. We've kind of personalized it. We're going to make this a declaration of our intent to live dreaming and planning with God. Let's do this. Now is the time. Here comes God's kingdom. Let's change our hearts and lives and trust this good news. Will you pray with me? Father, thank you that you are making all things new. And not only that, but you invite us to be a part of it. That's just a mind-blowing reality to me. I pray that you would give us the courage to embrace that invitation, to do whatever we need to do to gain the clarity that we need around how you have designed us and the ways you're redeeming our story so that we can be at work in your kingdom in ways that help us become an unstoppable source of God's love that changes our world. I imagine a future where, because of the people of Meadow Heights living out their calling and with intention, day after day, dreaming and planning, we're truly seeing your kingdom come and your will done on earth as it is in heaven in bigger and bigger ways, day after day. Thank you for the opportunity to do that together. In your name, amen.